A millionaire meets an ugly bridesmaid and falls in love with her when he learns that. Samantha Green adjusted the collar of her thrifted blazer as she entered the ballroom of the Grand Astoria, clutching a gift bag with trembling fingers. Her heels, borrowed and half a size too small, clicked uncertainly against the marble floor. Around her, guests laughed in tailored suits and designer gowns, their ease with wealth and decorum forming an invisible wall between her and them. She wasn't here to serve drinks or collect plates, not tonight, but the instinct to disappear into the background clung to her like perfume. She had known the bride since childhood, had shared secrets with her under the mulberry tree behind the local church. Claire had gone on to study international law and marry a man with a last name that made headlines. Samantha had stayed in Houston, teaching music at a public school where funding was a constant battle and students came to class hungry. Tonight she was here as a bridesmaid, and yet she felt more out of place than ever. Across the room, Nathaniel Langston checked his watch for the third time in as many minutes. The wedding was beautiful, extravagant even, a perfect display for the glossy magazines that followed his family's movements like hounds. But Nate had little patience for these functions. Boardrooms, billion-dollar contracts, late-night strategy meetings, that was his terrain. Not champagne toasts and idle chatter. "You're brooding again," came his sister's voice, teasing and soft. Olivia Langston, always luminous, handed him a glass of whiskey. "I'm observing," he said dryly. "Try participating," she said, nudging him toward the dance floor. "Claire says her best friend is flying solo tonight and needs a partner." Before he could object, Olivia had vanished into the crowd. Moments later, a woman in a burgundy dress appeared before him. Her smile was hesitant, her gaze curious behind square-rimmed glasses. "Hi," she said. "I'm Sam." "Nate," he replied, offering his hand without a trace of the usual practiced charm. As the band began to play, they moved tentatively across the floor. She apologized quietly each time she missed a step, and he, usually critical of inefficiency in all things, found himself strangely unbothered. "You don't look like you enjoy dancing," she remarked. "Not particularly," he admitted. "Then we're a perfect match," she said, and to his surprise he laughed, a real laugh, not the polite chuckle he reserved for investors. They talked as they danced, or more accurately swayed. She mentioned her students, her struggle to fund the school's fledgling music program, and the joy of seeing a child light up when they mastered a new instrument. Nate, for once, said very little. He listened. Really listened. "What do you do?" she asked eventually. He hesitated. "Finance. Corporate strategy." She nodded slowly. "Sounds intense." "It can be. You don't seem like a numbers guy," she said. "More like someone who should have done something else entirely." He blinked, caught off guard. "Like what?" She shrugged. "Something creative, maybe. You have that, what's the word? Contained energy. Like you're holding back a part of yourself." It was the first time in years anyone had looked at him and seen something other than a title or a bank balance. When the song ended, she stepped away. "Thanks for the dance," she said, already turning. He stood still, disoriented by the sudden absence of her presence. "Can I buy you a drink?" he asked impulsively. She glanced over her shoulder. "I don't drink at weddings," she said. "It messes with my ability to remember what I said the next morning." He smiled. "Then coffee?" She considered him for a moment. "Maybe," she said. "If you tell me what you're really doing in that suit." Then she was gone, slipping into the crowd, leaving behind only the scent of lilac and the echo of something that felt like the beginning of a story either of them had expected to start. 3 days after the wedding, Nathaniel Langston sat behind his glass desk on the 47th floor of Langston Holdings, a folder open before him but unread. The Houston skyline stretched beyond the window, sleek, modern, indifferent. His assistant knocked once before entering. "Your lunch meeting's been rescheduled," she said. "Also, a Samantha Green left a voicemail." He looked up sharply. "Did she say why?" "She didn't. Just said she was returning a missed call." He hadn't called. At least, not yet. But he'd searched. Samantha Green, music teacher. He'd found her school's website easily. A professional photo, modest, warm, her smile slightly crooked. He'd stared longer than he should have. Then he'd stumbled upon an online fundraiser for her students, seeking donations for basic instruments. That was what finally drove him to act. He pulled out his phone and drafted a message, deleted it, then tried again. Nate, it was good meeting you at the wedding. Would you be open to coffee this week? The response came 12 minutes later. Sam, depends. Are you bringing the suit? He smiled. Nate, no tie. That's my compromise. Sam, Thursday, 5 p.m., Cafe Camellia, Midtown. I'll be the one without the heels. Samantha arrived early and ordered tea. She had almost talked herself out of coming, 3 times on the drive over. She wasn't naive. Nate Langston belonged to the kind of world that had chauffeurs and private elevators. She belonged to a world where she used expired coupons and ducked calls from credit card companies. She looked up just as he entered. No tie, true to his word. His hair slightly tousled, an effort at casualness she appreciated more than she could explain. Hey, he said, sliding into the seat across from her. Thanks for this. She raised a brow. Still unclear what this is. He nodded. Fair. Just wanted to talk. And they did. For an hour. Then 2. They spoke of music and education, of pressure and ambition. He told her he used to sketch buildings as a kid, had considered architecture before his father's health declined and the expectation fell on him to take over Langston Holdings. So you became the heir apparent, she said. He looked at her. You say it like it's a prison sentence. Isn't it? He paused. Sometimes it feels that way. When the cafe began to close, she stood. Thanks for the tea. Can I walk you to your car? He asked. I took the bus. A pause. Then I'll wait with you. As they stood under the amber glow of the streetlight, she said, People like you don't usually stay for bus stops. People like me? Men with buildings named after their families. I'm not my father, he said quietly. She studied his face for a moment. We'll see. The bus arrived, and she stepped on without turning back. But as the bus pulled away, Nate remained where he stood, staring after it, hands in his coat pockets, the hum of the street around him unable to drown out the thought that maybe, just maybe, she was right to test his sincerity. He didn't know it yet, but his world, and hers, had already begun to shift. It had been 10 days since their coffee, 10 days in which Nathaniel Langston had done something wholly unfamiliar. He waited. He didn't send another message. He didn't orchestrate another meeting or have his assistant call under the guise of a follow-up. He simply went about his life, running a company valued at $8.4 billion, sitting through merger talks, and reviewing financials while Samantha Green's voice echoed quietly in his mind, uninvited and persistent. In a boardroom full of strategists, he found himself thinking about how she spoke with her hands when she was passionate, a fluttering motion, like punctuation. When he reviewed a proposal to convert a closed community center into luxury apartments, he remembered her saying, You can tell a lot about a city by how it treats the spaces that can't turn a profit. She hadn't been trying to impress him. She had simply said what she believed. And that, he realized, was rare. On a rainy Tuesday, he finally opened the fundraiser link again. Her school's music department needed $15,000. Not for luxuries, for basics, strings, reeds, sheet music stands. He clicked, donate, and entered a figure. Amount, $15,000. Anonymous. He closed the tab and returned to a conference call without another thought. Or so he told himself. Samantha didn't see the donation until Thursday morning. She stared at her screen for a full minute, the coffee in her mug growing cold. 15,000. Just like that. There was no name, no message. But she knew. She showed the email to her colleague, Mr. Patel. An anonymous angel. He grinned. Maybe we should wish for timpani next time. But Samantha couldn't smile. Something about it unsettled her. It wasn't that she wasn't grateful. It was that it shifted the ground beneath her, even if only slightly. That evening, she typed out a message and hovered over send for 10 minutes before finally pressing the button. Sam, I assume you know something about the fundraiser. The response came 2 hours later. Nate, I heard the music program needed help. Sam, why anonymously? Nate, because it wasn't supposed to be about me. She stared at the message. That simple. Sam, thank you. Nate, it's your students who'll make it count. There was no follow-up invitation. No overreach. Just the truth, clean and without embellishment. She didn't know what to do with that. 2 weeks later, he showed up at her school. No warning. No grand entrance. Just Nate Langston in slacks and a casual jacket, standing awkwardly by the front office with a visitor badge and a puzzled expression. I didn't know if this was okay, he said when she found him near the lockers. It's a public school, she replied, arms crossed. You have clearance. I wanted to see what you built. She hesitated, then led him to the music room. The door was open, and inside, her students rehearsed, off-key in places, exuberant in others. A poster on the wall read, "Mistakes mean you're trying. They're not polished," she said, watching them with a mix of affection and frustration. But they're learning. They sound real, he said. She glanced at him. You mean rough? I mean alive. He stayed for half an hour, listening in silence, nodding politely to the kids who offered waves and curious looks. When he left, he didn't say goodbye, just smiled and walked backward down the hallway, as if reluctant to turn his back. That weekend they met again, this time by accident. A bookstore in Montrose. She was browsing poetry, he was in architecture. He saw her first, and for once, didn't approach. She noticed him eventually and walked over, holding up a copy of Auden. You read poetry? Not recently, he admitted. Pity, she said. You look like you could use a metaphor. He grinned. Teach me. They sat in the cafe attached to the bookstore, and she read him lines, laughing when he frowned at the ambiguity. You can't spreadsheet your way through this, she teased. It's supposed to be messy. Sounds like life. She blinked, then smiled. That evening, he walked her to her car. They didn't speak about what this was or what came next. But when she turned to unlock her door, she paused. You still feel like you're holding something back. He looked down. You said that before? And you didn't deny it. He met her gaze. What if I am? Then figure out what it is, Nate, she said gently. And decide if you're willing to let it go. She got into her car and drove off, leaving him standing there, the evening shadows stretching long and sharp across the lot. Later that night, alone in his penthouse, he found an old sketchbook, one he hadn't touched since his mother's funeral 12 years ago. Inside were drawings. Buildings that didn't exist. Designs for schools with gardens, libraries with curved ceilings and soft light. At the back of the book, in neat, boyish handwriting, was a phrase underlined 3 times, spaces for people, not power. He closed the book and sat there, the city glittering below him, the silence thick and humming with something he couldn't name. It wasn't just about Samantha. It was about himself, about who he'd once been, and what he had buried to become the man the world respected. Now, he wasn't sure that man deserved her. Or himself. But for the first time in a long time, Nathaniel Langston wanted to find out. It was a Wednesday morning, and the air in Houston was heavy with the kind of humidity that made even optimism feel like it had to wade through something. Samantha Green stood at the front of her music classroom with a clipboard in one hand and a dulled pencil in the other, trying to organize the logistics for the upcoming spring showcase. Miss Green, are we really doing a duet with the science club? Asked Amina, one of her 8th graders, her violin balanced loosely on her shoulder. Yes, because innovation is not just about experiments, Samantha replied, flipping her ponytail over one shoulder. It's about collaboration. And the science club built those sound-reactive lights we're using. The kids groaned in playful protest. Samantha raised her hands. You get to play music. They get to press buttons. Everyone wins. There was a knock on the open classroom door. She turned, expecting the janitor or maybe Mr. Patel with another broken microphone. It was Nathaniel Langston. Wearing a gray blazer over a dark blue shirt, he looked like he'd stepped out of a different world, not out of place, but like a chapter misfiled into the wrong book. "Mr. Langston," she said, trying to keep her tone neutral. "Mr. Langston?" one of her students whispered. "Is that the guy from the fundraiser?" A chorus of subtle giggles followed. "I didn't mean to interrupt," Nate said. "But if you have 5 minutes after class..." She glanced at the clock, then at the students. "You all have 15 minutes to rehearse without me. Make it count, or I'll put the trumpet solo back in." They sat in the courtyard outside, on a weather-worn bench that creaked under their weight. A breeze stirred the magnolia leaves overhead. "I came to ask for your opinion," he began. "Okay," she said cautiously. "My company owns 3 unused properties in the East End," he said. "We've been debating redevelopment options. And you want to build condos," she said, not unkindly. "I want to build something useful," he corrected. "A community arts center. Music, dance, performance. A place that actually gives something back." She stared at him. "That's not a standard Langston Holdings project." "No," he agreed. "But maybe that's the problem." She didn't speak for a moment. "And you want me to what?" "Help design it. Let it shape what it becomes. Not as an employee. As a partner." Her breath caught. "I've spent years building things," he continued, "but nothing that made people feel seen. You know how to do that. I want to create something that matters, and I don't trust anyone else to do it right." She looked away, heart thudding. She was used to offers that required sacrifice, compromise, some part of herself given away for the promise of something better. But this felt different. "Why me?" she asked finally. "Because you see people for who they are," he said. "Not who they're pretending to be." She was silent for a moment. Then she laughed softly, not mocking, just overwhelmed. "You do realize I'm a public school teacher who's never led a construction project." "You've led everything that matters," he said simply. "Let me handle the logistics. I want you to dream." She looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time she didn't see the name or the suit or the staggering net worth. She saw the man who waited at bus stops, who listened to off-key middle schoolers with the reverence of a Carnegie Hall critic, who showed up, quietly, without fanfare. "I'll think about it," she said. "I'll wait." That night, Samantha sat on the floor of her apartment, papers spread out around her, blueprints he'd left, sketches, outlines. He had already secured the permits, had even earmarked funding that wouldn't touch a single public dollar. All she had to do was say yes. Her phone buzzed. A text from Nate. "Nate, you don't have to make this decision for me. Or for anyone else. Only if it feels like something true." She stared at the screen. Then slowly typed. "Sam, what if I say yes and we fail?" The response came quickly. "Nate, then we fail honestly. Together." She didn't reply. Instead, she looked at the blueprints again, her fingers tracing the edges of the lines. It had been a long time since someone had invited her to build something instead of fit into something. And maybe, just maybe, she was ready. The East End of Houston wasn't where people went to see the best parts of the city, not yet. It was the kind of neighborhood city planners used phrases like redevelopment zone and opportunity corridor to describe, their sanitized words covering a history of neglect. But Samantha Green saw something else as she stood on the cracked pavement of the lot that would one day become the East End Arts Center. Potential. It was a strange place for a teacher to be, surrounded by men in reflective vests, half-finished walls, and dust that stuck to her skin, but she showed up every day after school. Nate kept his word. She wasn't just a figurehead. She was part of every conversation, material selections, program outlines, community partnerships. And slowly, the idea that had once felt impossible began to take shape. They worked late into the evenings. Samantha brought notebooks filled with sketches and ideas from her students, an outdoor mural space, a music room with soundproof practice booths, a small theater with collapsible seating. Nate listened, challenged her where necessary, but never dismissed her. One evening, they stood on what would eventually be the second-floor terrace, watching the sun slip behind the skyline. Nate handed her a bottle of water. She took it, wiping the sweat from her brow. "You're different here," she said. "Different how?" "Less polished." "Less." "Langston." He smiled. "That's the point." They didn't kiss. They didn't hold hands. But something passed between them in the quiet, something stronger than flirtation, deeper than romance. A shared commitment to something bigger than themselves. In her apartment that night, Samantha sat at her kitchen table with a bowl of cereal and a laptop open to a blank Word document. She was supposed to be drafting a grant proposal. Instead, she scrolled through a folder Nate had created, photos of the construction progress, scans of students' artwork they planned to frame for opening day, even a tentative schedule for community workshops. She paused on one image, a wide shot of the construction team framing the rehearsal space, sunlight pouring through the skeleton of what would be walls. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future that didn't feel like a compromise. Her phone buzzed. A text from Nate. "Nate, meeting with City Council tomorrow at 2 p.m. Want to join?" She smiled. "Sam, only if you promise to let me talk first this time." "Nate, deal. You're better at it anyway." She put the phone down and started typing. The grant application practically wrote itself. City Hall was colder than she expected, both in temperature and tone. The council members wore suits and expressions that said "convince me." Nate introduced the project in broad strokes: funding, economic impact, projected reach. Then he stepped aside. Samantha took a breath. "Most of my students have never been to a concert," she began. "Not because they don't want to, but because those spaces don't feel like they belong to them." She spoke not with practiced eloquence, but with something rarer, conviction. "This center isn't just about art. It's about giving kids permission to dream out loud. To walk into a room and see themselves reflected in what's on the walls, the stage, the very structure. And maybe that doesn't show up in your quarterly reports. But it shows up in the kind of people we raise." Silence. Then a slow nod from Councilwoman Reyes. "We'll approve expedited zoning," she said. "You have my support." Outside, Nate turned to her. "That was remarkable. You gave me the space," she said simply. "I'm starting to think you're the one building something here. I'm just following your blueprint." She looked at him. "You're learning." Weeks passed. Framing turned to drywall, drywall to paint. The center came alive brick by brick, color by color. But just as the grand opening loomed, something unexpected happened. A city council aide leaked Nate's internal proposal, the early version, back when he still considered turning the land into high-end condos. A local blogger published it with the headline, "Langston's charity PR stunt, Arts Center wasn't the first plan." The backlash was immediate. Parents pulled their volunteer support. Partners questioned their involvement. Some of Samantha's own students asked if the project had been a lie. She found Nate in his office at the site, the document open on his laptop. He didn't look up as she entered. "You knew this could happen," she said. "I thought it wouldn't matter," he replied. "That the outcome justified the messy start." She stepped forward. "And do you still believe that?" He finally met her eyes. "Not if it makes you doubt it too." She shook her head. "I don't. But they do. And that matters." They sat in silence. The center, alive and nearly finished around them, felt suddenly fragile. "What do we do?" he asked. She looked out the window. "We tell the truth. And then we let the work speak louder than the headlines." He nodded slowly. "I'll call a press conference." "No," she said. "We do it together." The next morning, They stood side by side in front of the building. No stage, no PR firm. Just them, and a crowd of skeptical reporters and community members. Nate spoke first. The original plan was different. And that was my failure, not because it changed, but because I didn't lead with transparency. He paused. But this, what we're building now, it's better. Because someone showed me what it could be. Then Samantha stepped forward. We're not asking you to forget how this started. We're asking you to look at what it's become. To come see the kids who will rehearse here. The murals painted by local artists. The workshops led by people who live right here in this neighborhood. She looked out over the crowd. This belongs to all of us now. Later, back inside, as the doors closed behind them and the tension lifted, Samantha turned to Nate. You said you wanted to build something real. I didn't know it would cost so much, he said. It always does, she replied. Then, for the first time, he reached for her hand. Not to make a statement. Not to prove a point. Just to feel her there. And she didn't let go. The official opening of the East End Arts Center was set for late spring. Invitations had gone out to schools, local media, donors, and community leaders. The building smelled of fresh paint and new carpet. Sunlight streamed through wide windows, catching on mosaic tiles designed by students and volunteers. It was beautiful. It was real. Samantha Green should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt something quieter and heavier. In the weeks following the press conference, she had become the accidental face of the project. Interviews, panels, community meetings. Everyone wanted to hear from the teacher who'd taught a billionaire how to care. The phrase made her wince every time she read it. The story was too simple. Too neat. Nate, for his part, stepped back from the spotlight. He let her speak, let her take credit. She suspected he believed it was what she needed, what the project needed. And maybe he was right. But something had shifted between them. Not in anger. Not in resentment. But in the way people who've walked through fire together look at each other once the smoke clears. With recognition, and the awareness that they are no longer the same. They still worked well together. Still trusted each other. Still exchanged texts filled with quiet understanding. But they didn't talk about what was happening between them. Not anymore. One evening, 2 weeks before the grand opening, she found him in the Black Box Theater, sitting alone in the dark, watching the newly installed lights flicker on in test mode, red, blue, soft gold. She slid into the seat beside him. Nice effect, she said. He nodded. Quiet here. Strange for a place built to make noise. He gave her a half-smile. Maybe that's why I like it. They sat in silence. Finally, she asked, Do you regret it? Which part? Turning down the condo deal. Choosing this instead. He didn't answer right away. I regret that I didn't know what I wanted sooner, he said. That I had to meet you to see it. She turned toward him. You didn't need me to do the right thing, Nate. You just needed someone to remind you that it was the right thing. That's the difference, he said. You remind me of the person I thought I had to bury to survive in my world. She stared at him, a beat passing between them. And then, quietly, Do you want this to end when the ribbon gets cut? It wasn't a question about the center. It was about them. About the space between silence and possibility. He looked at her, really looked. I don't know how to be in your world without taking up too much space, he admitted. Without making it about me. She smiled, sad, knowing. Maybe you don't have to be in my world, she said. Maybe we build a new one. One that fits us both. He reached for her hand, and this time, she didn't pull away. But she also didn't lean in. They stayed like that, side by side, the lights above shifting in quiet rhythm. It wasn't resolution. But it was honest. And for now, that was enough. The East End Arts Center opened to fanfare that neither of them had fully anticipated. What was meant to be a modest ribbon-cutting turned into a city-wide event. Children ran across the stage in paper crowns. Musicians from local high schools filled the halls with sound. Food trucks lined the block. There were speeches, of course. Nate gave his, brief and polished. Samantha's came last. She stood at the podium in a simple navy dress, holding no script, only a photo, a grainy snapshot of her first classroom. It showed a cramped space with mismatched chairs, a few battered instruments, and students who looked far too tired for their age. "This is where I started," she said. "And this is why this place matters." She paused, scanning the crowd, students, parents, teachers, city officials. "Because art doesn't just teach us to create. It teaches us to belong. To imagine new rooms where we didn't think we were allowed to stand." Her voice caught, just slightly. "We didn't build a center," she said. "We built a room where everyone fits." The applause was thunderous. But when she stepped down, it was the silence between her and Nate that resonated loudest. He met her at the foot of the stage, hands in his pockets, eyes unusually vulnerable. "You didn't have to say that about me," he said, voice low. "I wasn't talking about you," she replied. Then softer. "I was talking about us." They didn't say anything more. Not then. Over the weeks that followed, the center filled with life. Samantha split her time between the school and the center, watching with quiet pride as students who once struggled to speak in class now read poems into microphones, or tried their hands at painting murals that stretched the length of entire walls. Nate came by often. He never announced his visits. Sometimes he sat quietly in the back of a workshop, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. Other times he helped stack chairs, sweep up after a late-night rehearsal. He didn't ask for praise. He never wore a suit inside the building. They became something unspoken, a rhythm neither wanted to break. But outside the center's walls, the world was louder. A columnist from a local paper wrote a profile on Samantha, calling her the teacher who changed a legacy. Another piece followed, questioning whether a billionaire like Langston could really atone for the harm caused by his company's past developments. The articles didn't mention their growing closeness, but the undercurrent was there: speculation, curiosity, scrutiny. One afternoon, while reviewing grant renewals in her office, Samantha received an email from the district's communications department. Subject: Media inquiries regarding East End Arts Center leadership. She skimmed it, pulse quickening. Questions about your relationship with Mr. Langston, school's representation, potential conflict of interest. It was polite. Professional. But the message was clear. Choose. She stared at her reflection in the office window, the sunlight fractured against her glasses. That night Nate knocked on her apartment door. No pretense. No meeting. She let him in wordlessly. "They called me too," he said, taking off his jacket. She nodded. "They want to know where the lines are." He studied her. "Do you know?" She walked to the window, arms folded tightly. "I didn't plan on any of this," she said. "Not the attention. Not the center turning into a symbol. Not us." "Neither did I," he said. "But we're here." She turned toward him. "And where is here exactly?" He stepped forward. Not demanding. Just present. "Here is where I come when I stop pretending I have all the answers," he said. "Where I remember what it feels like to want something that isn't measured in market value or quarterly gains." She blinked. "I love you," he said. "I haven't said it because I didn't want it to sound like gratitude. Or obligation. But it's not. It's truth." She stared at him, emotions a whirlwind inside her. "Nate, you don't have to say it back," he said. "But I'm not walking away from this. Not from you. If that means stepping away from the center, I will. If it means staying in the background, I'll do that too. But I won't pretend us, doesn't matter." The silence that followed was intense. It was full. Samantha stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, until they were inches apart. "I love you too," she said quietly. "But this thing we're building, it's fragile. Not because of us. But because the world doesn't know what to do with something this honest." He nodded. "Then we protect it. However we have to." She leaned her forehead against his chest, the steady rhythm of his heart grounding her. "We're going to make a lot of people uncomfortable," she whispered. "We already have," he murmured back. The next morning, they issued a joint statement. Clear. Professional. Transparent. Yes, they were in a relationship. No, Nate had no operational authority over the center. Yes, every financial decision had been reviewed by independent auditors. They signed it together. Some people were outraged. Others applauded the honesty. The noise came and went, like weather. And through it all, the center remained open. Children kept creating. And in a quiet office overlooking the main gallery, Samantha and Nate sat side by side, sketching plans for the next space they might build, not in stone or steel, but in trust. Samantha had always believed in staying busy when the world got too loud. So when the media noise around her relationship with Nate spiked again, after a particularly aggressive column claimed she was elevating on the back of a billionaire's conscience, she returned to her classroom. The students didn't care about the gossip. They cared about who got the solo in the spring recital, and whether the center's new recording booth could fit an entire quartet. In those moments, surrounded by teenage bickering and sour notes, she felt most herself. But when the bell rang and the room emptied, she sat in the quiet and wondered if this was how it would always be, a life split between creation and commentary. That weekend, Nate invited her to dinner at a small restaurant far outside the city. No cameras. No whispers. Just quiet, flickering candlelight and the sound of cutlery against plates. "You've been quiet," he said gently. "Trying not to think about the internet." He nodded, understanding. "I spoke with my board," he added. "They offered to release a statement distancing the company from me personally. Said it might help reduce scrutiny on the center." Her brow furrowed. "They do that?" He shrugged. "They don't care what I do as long as the earnings keep climbing." She shook her head slowly. "You'd really let them sever you from what you've built? I'd rather lose the boardroom than lose the only part of my life that feels true." The words sat heavy between them. "I don't want you to have to choose," she said quietly. "Not between me and your work." He leaned in. "Then let's make something new. Something that doesn't require those choices." 3 weeks later, he stepped down as CEO. The announcement hit every major business publication. Some hailed it as visionary. Others called it reckless. Nate declined every interview. He issued one statement. "Legacy means nothing if it's not earned every day. I'm choosing to build mine differently now." Samantha found out when her phone blew up mid-class. When she finally reached him, he answered with a quiet, "Hi. You just left?" "No. I stayed. With what matters." She didn't know what to say. Pride warred with fear. Joy with uncertainty. "Okay," she said finally. "So what now?" "No," he said. "We build without apology." He launched a new initiative a month later, a nonprofit venture designed to fund sustainable, community-led arts programs across the country. He called it the Green Initiative, though she protested. "I didn't do this alone," she said. "No," he agreed. "But you were the first to show me how." They worked side by side again, but this time without secrets. Without shame. The tension between them, once laced with caution, now moved with ease. Late nights turned into early mornings. They began to share more than just ideas and space. They shared the quiet, domestic things too. Coffee cups with smudged rims. Books left dog-eared on opposite ends of the couch. A grocery list written in both their handwriting. It wasn't a fairy tale. They argued. Sometimes fiercely. About scale. About risk. About the pressures they still faced from both their worlds. But they also learned how to stay in the room together. How to disagree without unraveling. How to hold space for one another. One evening, back at the center, Samantha found a small package on her desk. No name. No note. Inside was a key. She turned to find Nate standing at the door, leaning casually against the frame. "To what?" she asked, holding it up. He smiled. To a studio we haven't built yet. I rented the property next door. She raised an eyebrow. Thought we might need more space. For the next chapter. She crossed the room slowly, until there was no distance left between them. You keep building for me. No, he said, his voice low. I'm building with you. And she believed him. Not because of the key, but because of everything they'd already unlocked. The property next door was a squat, windowless building that used to be a warehouse for party supplies, plastic streamers and deflated helium tanks, all long gone. The floors were uneven, the walls stained with decades of tape and forgotten banners. Samantha stood in the center of the room, arms crossed, while Nate watched her with the air of a man presenting something priceless. She tilted her head. It's hideous. He grinned. Yes. And you think we can turn this into something inspiring? I don't think, he said. I know. What followed was 6 months of sawdust and sweat. They argued over lighting fixtures and wall color. She fought for textured sound panels. He insisted on a retractable ceiling grid for lighting rigs. But always, the disagreements ended in shared laughter or long nights at the diner down the street, scribbling plans on napkins between bites of pie. They weren't just building a studio. They were learning how to fight well, to bend without breaking. Outside the public eye, their relationship became something quieter. Deeper. The city stopped whispering. Or maybe they just stopped listening. On Sunday mornings, they'd walk to the bakery on Fannin Street. She'd order lemon muffins. He'd get black coffee. They rarely talked about work. Sometimes he'd ask, "Do you miss your old life?" She'd always reply, "No." "Do you?" And he'd answer every time, "Only the parts before I knew better." The night before the new studio opened, Samantha wandered through its halls alone. The recording booths were empty, waiting. The main hall echoed faintly with her footsteps. On the wall near the entrance, a plaque had been mounted. It read, "Built by hands that chose meaning over applause." She hadn't written it. Nate hadn't either. One of the center's students had submitted the phrase during a writing workshop. They'd voted unanimously to use it. She found Nate in the office, sitting on the floor, legs stretched out, sketchpad open. "You've drawn that same arch 5 times," she said. "Trying to get the proportions right for the rooftop." She sat beside him. "Do you ever wonder if we're just running from something?" she asked. He paused. "No. I think we're running towards something. Something harder. But better." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Tomorrow's going to be huge." "Yeah," he said, closing the pad. "But tonight, it's just us." The opening drew a quieter crowd than the original center. No cameras this time. Just families. Students. Local artists who knew what it meant to make something from scraps. Samantha opened the ceremony. She didn't make a speech. She read a poem written by one of her students instead. Nate stood beside her, saying nothing, just listening. Afterward, someone asked if they were going to expand beyond Houston. Nate said, "Not yet." Samantha added, "Some things deserve to grow slowly." Later that night, as they walked home under the early spring sky, she stopped him by the gate to his building. "I've been thinking," she said. "Dangerous." She rolled her eyes. "If we do this right," she said, "there's going to be a whole generation of kids who don't think people like us are from different worlds." He looked at her. Really looked. "Maybe by then," he said, "we won't be." And she kissed him, not to make a point, not to promise anything dramatic, but to say, "We made it here." Not in spite of who they were, but because of who they'd become. 2 years after the opening of the East End Art Studio, the neighborhood had changed, not in the ways developers usually measured, but in the ways that mattered. Children walked to the center after school without fear. Murals lined alley walls with stories of migration, resilience, music. The cafe across the street began hosting open mic nights. A small bookstore opened where the pawn shop used to be. People lingered more. Talked more. Stayed. Samantha Green's life no longer felt like a tightrope walk. It had become something steady. Not always easy, but rooted. She still taught at her school by choice. The center remained her second home, but the classroom was her compass. She refused promotions, turned down offers from other districts. She told Nate once, "The closer I stay to the kids, the less I forget why we started any of this." He had nodded, understanding. He no longer tried to talk her into scaling faster or chasing grants with flashier logos. His pace had changed. He still wore tailored jackets, still moved with the confidence of someone used to being heard. But now, he waited more. Listened more. They shared a house now, small, near the center, with a garden that refused to grow in neat rows. On Sundays, Samantha read in the Sun while Nate sketched building concepts for artists in cities he'd never been to. They weren't married. Not yet. Maybe never. There'd been no proposal. They didn't need one. Commitment for them was not marked by diamonds or declarations. It lived in the rituals. The everyday. A cup of coffee placed quietly on a desk. A shared glance across a chaotic rehearsal room. A hand resting, without needing to hold, but choosing to stay. One evening, the center hosted its annual exhibition. This year's theme was Origins. Students presented sculptures made from reclaimed wood, poems stitched into quilts, dance pieces that traced migration through motion. The room pulsed with energy, raw and real. Samantha stood in the back, watching it unfold. Next to her, Nate adjusted the display of a student's blueprint, a model of a city where no building stood taller than the community center. "She says it's her dream city," he whispered. "She's not wrong," Samantha murmured. "You'd design a place like that." He smiled. "I already did. With you." Later, they slipped away from the noise and walked the short distance home in silence, their footsteps echoing in the calm of dusk. At their gate, Nate stopped. "I have something," he said, reaching into his coat pocket. Her breath caught, not from fear, but from the weight of all that had led them here. He didn't pull out a ring. Just a folded piece of paper. She opened it slowly. It was a sketch. Of a classroom. A center. A home. All in one structure. Walls shaped like open hands. A roof made of windows. "What is this?" "It's our next build," he said. "A place for everything we've learned." She looked at him. "I love you," he said simply. "Still. Always. Even when it's hard." Her reply was a whisper. "Then let's keep building." And so they did. No dramatic endings. No spotlights. Just two people who had crossed an invisible line between worlds and made a life not in spite of that difference, but because of it. A quiet love. A shared purpose. And a future still under construction.